Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering woke panic as first lawsuit takes on new gender identity Title IX rules. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. The Biden administration's Department of Education recently released its final Title IX regulations. In those regulations, that are slated to go into effect on August 1st, 2024, the controversial rule changes include a change in definition of the word sex to include gender identity. The policy, if it goes into effect, would have far-reaching effects on campus due process, free speech, gender transitioning of youth, parental rights, and women's sports. So the Biden administration thinks it's okay to change the definition of words, and then to just use existing laws and regulations to carry out a political agenda. Multiple states now are pushing back on this. While this would force schools K through 12 to use transgender pronouns on the basis of a child saying, well, my name is this, my pronouns are this, the changes would be much more serious and widespread, even than pushing people on a First Amendment basis to have compelled speech. Here's what Texas is doing about this. From Breitbart, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton sues Biden administration over Title IX rewrite pushing transgender ideology. Florida just came out with a lawsuit. From Politico, Florida sues Biden administration over Title IX. And from Legal Insurrection, Louisiana is suing Biden over the Title IX interpretation allowing males and female sports and spaces. Idaho, Mississippi, and Montana are joining the lawsuit. And America First Legal is joining in with Texas to support Texas's lawsuit. America First Legal partners with the state of Texas and Attorney General Ken Paxton, suing Biden administration over radical new Title IX rules that mandate radical transgender ideology in schools and threaten women and girls. The Biden administration couldn't help themselves. They had to go and say, you know what? All we need to do is redefine the meaning of a word or two and push our radical agenda. So they went and did it. So here's the response from Texas, from Breitbart. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is suing the Biden administration over its Title IX rewrite, which pushes transgender ideology. The new Title IX regulations are largely being interpreted as promoting gender confusion, using the term gender identity rather than biological sex to describe certain situations. Quote, the new rules define sex discrimination as discrimination based on gender identity as well as sexual proclivities, and schools cannot separate people based on sex. The language has been interpreted to mandate allowing boys into girls' bathrooms and changing rooms. Therefore, the rule not only promotes but forces transgender ideology on schools. All schools, K through 12, not just college. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is suing the Biden administration over the overhaul to Title IX, making it clear Texas will not comply. Quote, Texas will not allow Joe Biden to rewrite Title IX at whim, destroying legal protections for women in furtherance of his radical obsession with gender ideology, Paxton's office said in a statement. This attempt to subvert federal law is plainly illegal, undemocratic, and divorced from reality. Texas will always take the lead to oppose Biden's extremist destructive policies that put women at risk. It goes into further detail, explaining that the new rule contorts these protections for women by forcing schools to accommodate the wishes of men claiming to identify as women or transgender to enter female-only spaces and join female-only organizations. This would force schools to permit biological males to use female restrooms and lockers. If schools refused, federal funding would be withheld. Paxton's office notes that the Biden administration first attempted to implement this via informal agency guidance. Ultimately, Paxton believes the new rule violates existing federal law, ignores the Constitution, and denies women the protections that Title IX was intended to afford them. It continues. The Biden administration has exceeded its authority and radically distorted the meaning intended by Congress when the law was made. Further, the changes would fundamentally transform the educational atmosphere of publicly funded educational institutions, forcing communities to capitulate to unscientific gender ideology and putting girls and women at risk in K through 12 schools and on college campuses. K means kindergarten. I know you know that, but we should take a second and think about that. In kindergarten, they need to do this in kindergartens. Only to push an ideological agenda would they need to do this in kindergartens. Texas is not the only state refusing to go along with the Biden administration's overhaul of Title IX. Florida's Commissioner on Education, Manny Diaz, made it clear in a letter that the new rule will not be embraced in Florida, as the Biden administration maims the statute beyond recognition in an attempt to gaslight the country into believing that biological sex no longer has any meaning. And Florida has since filed a lawsuit, and we will check that out. Like Texas, Florida agrees the rule would force educational institutions in the Sunshine State to violate federal and state laws, including the First Amendment and the state's Parental Rights in Education Act. Governor Ron DeSantis also released a video on the issue, making it abundantly clear that Florida will not comply. Quote, "We are not going to let Joe Biden undermine the rights of parents, and we are not going to let Joe Biden abuse his constitutional authority to try to impose these policies on us here in Florida." And just now coming out from Politico, Florida sues Biden administration over Title IX. Florida is once again fighting with the Biden administration over two familiar topics, education and LGBT rights. Florida Attorney General Ashley Moody filed a lawsuit to block the Biden administration's rules, creating new anti-discrimination protections for transgender and non-binary students. Politico is a left-leaning publication. What they mean to say is redefining sex and gender through a rule through one of the government's agencies, the Department of Education. It's not even a law. It's just a rule change in the Department of Education, one of the federal government departments. An absolutely outrageous overreach. They do not have the authority to do this. The rules, scheduled to take effect August 1st, 2024, apply to a federal education policy called Title IX that's intended to guarantee women's equality in schools and colleges. So they just redefined what a woman was, and then they took those rules and said, well, that applies to who we say it applies to now. The 84-page lawsuit argues that the 1970s law in question was only intended to apply to binary sex and charges that rulemaking standing otherwise is illegal. The Biden administration has been working on an overhaul of Trump-era rules interpreting Title IX since 2022. Florida's lawsuit was expected, and it's far from the only red-leaning state to sue. It follows the DeSantis administration memo from last week telling Florida schools to ignore the Biden administration's new rules. Both Moody and Florida Education Commissioner Manny Diaz warned the Title IX rules would make sex-separated locker rooms and bathrooms unsafe and override Florida laws that mandate them. The Attorney General also said she was worried that biological women might be forced to share a dorm room with transgender women. Diaz warned the Biden rules would override the Parental Rights in Education Act, the law Democrats and other critics call Don't Say Gay, which forbids instruction about LGBT topics in public schools for all grades. Florida law also says teachers can't be forced to use preferred pronouns for colleagues or students, while the Title IX rules say deliberate misgendering can constitute harassment depending on the situation. The latest lawsuit indicates that Florida has no intention of backing down from its stance on LGBT policy issues, even as DeSantis has changed some of his approaches to personal relationships and his personal persona since dropping out of the 2024 presidential race. Moody filed the lawsuit alongside other Republican attorneys general from Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina, as well as conservative organizations, the Independent Women's Network, Parents Defending Education and Speech First Incorporated. Other states filed a separate lawsuit. Moody said in a statement that the rules shed protections for women and accused federal officials of failing to think through real-world consequences. And in another lawsuit from Legal Insurrection, Louisiana sues Biden over Title IX interpretation, allowing males and female sports and spaces. Idaho, Mississippi, and Montana joined this lawsuit. So we can see there are multiple lawsuits going now. This will get heard through the courts, and I can't imagine that the courts will say, sure, at any time the federal government can decide to redefine a word and apply laws that were passed for the original definition of that word to whatever the new definition of the word is that you create. You could redefine anything that way. You could redefine the word murder. You could redefine any word and then just put it through a federal agency with new rules. I don't see that working. And when we talk about a radical ideology, you can't get much more radical than redefining words. Of course, they did do it already with the word racist. But this is the first time they've tried it officially using Title IX and trying to push through these ridiculous regulations. People who are experts in Title IX and experts in education have been responding, and they responded almost immediately to the rule change posted by the Biden administration. From SaveServices.org, release of controversial Title IX regulation revives calls to abolish the Department of Education. House Education and the Workforce Committee Chairwoman Virginia Fox comments, this final rule dumps kerosene on the already raging fire that is the Democrats' contemptuous culture war that aims to radically redefine sex and gender. The rule also undermines existing due process rights places students and institutions in legal jeopardy, and again undermines the protections Title IX is intended to provide. The due process rights changes are also horrendous in these Title IX rules. The change in due process rules go back to the Obama-type rules, where if you're accused of something, it's like a Me Too situation. You're guilty until proven innocent, and you're not allowed to really defend yourself as if it was in a court of law. It's all part of pushing a Marxist agenda. Former Education Secretary Betsy DeVos stated, "The Biden administration's radical rewrite of Title IX guts the half-century of protections and opportunities for women and callously replaces them with radical gender theory, as Biden's far-left political base demanded. This regulation is an assault on women and girls." And multiple experts and people in power are now asking to get rid of the Department of Education. From AFA Action, force and fraud are necessary to convince a people to believe lies, and the Biden administration has doubled down on both with this Title IX rewrite that will hurt real women and undermine the basic and natural distinctions between the sexes. From the Alexander Hamilton Institute for the Study of Western Civilization, President Biden's changes to Title IX is a roadmap to confusion and injustice. The Department of Education in its current incarnation has outlived its usefulness and needs to be abolished. From the Alliance Defending Freedom, the Biden administration's radical redefinition of sex turns back the clock on equal opportunity for women, threatens student safety and privacy, and undermines fairness in women's sports. From AMAC Action, Title IX's protection of women and girls to participate in female athletic programs would in effect be denied the benefits of such programs by allowing a person whose sex is male to participate in athletic programs or activities that are designed for women or girls. America First Legal has done a lot of great work pushing back the woke agenda. I cover them a lot on this channel, and they're covered often in Bloomberg, New York Times, on Fox. They're covered pretty much everywhere, from the left to the right, because these guys make change happen. From America First Legal partners with the state of Texas and Attorney General Paxton. America First Legal joins Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton in filing a critical lawsuit against President Biden's Secretary of Education and others to stop the Biden administration newly promulgated Title IX rules from wreaking havoc on women, children, and schools across the country. Title IX is a federal statute that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in any educational program that receives federal money, including K-12 schools, colleges, and universities. The new rule contorts these protections for women by forcing schools to accommodate the wishes of men claiming to identify as women or transgender, to enter female-only spaces and join female-only organizations. This would force schools to permit biological males to use female restrooms and lockers. If schools refuse, federal funding will be withheld. This rule violates existing federal law, ignores the Constitution, and denies women the protections that Title IX was intended to afford them. The Biden administration has exceeded its authority and radically distorted the meaning intended by Congress when the law was made. The Biden administration has attempted time and time again to manipulate long-standing federal law in an attempt to advance radical transgender ideology. In a previous legal action, America First Legal prevailed in a lawsuit on behalf of a class of doctors against the Biden administration's edict that attempted to force medical providers to provide transgender medical services to patients based on a similar erroneous interpretation of sex. And a statement from America First Legal President Stephen Miller. Quote, America First Legal is honored to stand with the great Ken Paxton and the state of Texas in filing this emergency lawsuit to stop Biden's war on women. Biden's new Title IX regulation is a vile obscenity. It forces women and girls to share locker rooms and restrooms with men. It forces them to call a he a she and to pretend in every way that a man is a woman, humiliating, degrading, and erasing women. This is an abomination. And as outside counsel for Texas, we will battle this regulation in court with all the legal fight we can bring. It must be defeated for the sake of American women and for the sake of our daughters, said Stephen Miller. And also from America First Legal is Gene Hamilton. He's involved in a lot of these cases. He says this, quote, the Biden administration's attempt to redefine sex and in turn, a basic biological reality that has existed for all human history to encompass gender identity must be stopped. If allowed to go into effect, every single educational institution that accepts federal funding, even if it doesn't want to, will be beaten into submission through investigations, enforcement actions, and litigation based on the whims of bureaucrats and confused young people. We are immensely proud to partner with Attorney General Paxton and the great state of Texas to stop the Biden administration from being able to implement its radical agenda. This is a very serious fight. It's a very important fight. And it is about Title IX, and it is about protecting women and girls and a natural, healthy society. But it's also about preventing the federal government from taking a word and redefining it to apply it to other existing law that was never intended to support that new purpose based on the changed definition issued by the federal government. It really means they can take any law and change that law to fit a new definition of one or more words. They can't allow this to go forward. I absolutely do not support these changes to Title IX. Even more importantly than that to me is allowing the federal government to change the definition of a word and apply that changed definition to existing law that was never intended to support the ideas represented by that change in the definition. It's a little complicated, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. We cannot allow the federal government or ideological people or anyone to change the meaning of words, because this is what happens. They can take existing law and they can persecute people. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.